Alright, I figured I'd show you while I'm doing this. This is the second narrow front Massey 12 I've ever done. I did the first one, I called it Spit Shine. It was a bare budget build. I built it with parts I found at some swap meets and stuff. And it was pretty much my project tractor to put all my ideas that I've thought about doing together and try it on something I didn't really care too much about how it looked. But back to the object at hand, this is the narrow front that I made. It'll use the stock steering arm and stock spindles and the stock front tires. This is not the stock front tires, obviously, but they're the ones that I had to throw on it. But basically what you do, that green piece there, don't know if you could tell, it's an axle housing for one of these tractors. It's a Peerless 2300 axle housing. They're the same as in John Deere 110, 112s. Any Peerless 4-speed in a garden tractor. It'd be that one. And so what you do is you take one of these and you'll notch it, and I'll show you a picture here in a second. So basically what you do is you notch it and you throw a little 1/2-13 bolt in there, right up there you can see. And you do that in a 1-inch shaft. So you get a 1-inch piece of round stock, and that'll go up there and hit the bottom of your frame and ride on that. And you'll drill holes in your frame and cut the front axle hanger off. Here's the holes that you drill in the frame. There's 3 of them because the 4th one would have been under this motor. But if you're worried about that, you could add a little brace. If you run the axle housing backwards, you can run a little brace off of that, but it should be all right. You normally don't back up with a lot of weight on it anyway, and it's pretty sturdy as it is. I've had no issue with that before. And then up under here, you have right there, this piece is where your axle hanger went. You want to cut off that and leave that little piece there on the bottom of this frame, because this frame will actually twist as you move and drive around. It'll twist a lot, and especially with this narrow front, it'll really torque on your frame a little bit. It won't be enough to hurt it, but you definitely will tell that it will flex a little more. But you want to leave that there for some bracing. You could cut it out if you have clearance issues, but I've done that before with the other one I did, and it had no issues. You could tell it was flexing, but it didn't bend anything and didn't hurt it. But that's just a little better way to do it, is leave that. And then you cut the front one completely off. My expert opinion on how to do that is, I'll show you. You grind as much as you can off on, so this was the front one, and it sat like this on the frame, as you can see, and I cut up on here. The weld is up in this corner, up in there, and here. And the problem is you really can't get in there real well unless you have a torch. But if you have a torch, you gotta be careful you don't tear up your frame all that much. So what I did was I ground in this corner here. I ground up here without getting the frame, and made it a little weaker. And then I cut over here and I got into that weld a little bit. And then I ground as much as I could off the weld up top. And then what I wound up doing was I hit this with a hammer, and it started bending pretty good. And then when this bent all the way over to the frame, because the frame was at the bottom here, and it bent this all the way up, And you can imagine this is against the frame and it's blocking everything. So I wound up cutting this off. So this is out of the picture. And then all you have left is this. And then I wound up just beating on it with the hammer until eventually it snapped off. And then, because this is a metal, of course, but it was a cast part, because you can see the little chip there. It's not really it's part of that weld and part of the casting of the frame, because the frame is all a cast piece. So when you bend it, your welds will bend there and crack, and that's what wound up breaking and getting this whole piece off without tearing up your frame too much. So that's a little tidbit on how I did that, and easiest way to do it, because otherwise you'll sit there forever trying to grind just into that corner and everything. So that's a little tip on how to do that. And the ideal, so these are the stock tire sizes: 23 8.5 in the rear, 4x8s in the front. And as you can see, I don't know if you could tell, you can see up on here, there's a little bit of a rake. You really can't tell too bad, but if you're really paying attention, you can tell. And this is the best I can do for clearance and be comfortable, because that's about a 1/4 inch or an 1/8 inch of clearance. And if you put different tires on, you gotta watch that when it comes around, it's not gonna scrub your frame. So that's a little tip there. You gotta make sure you have that shaft that you weld the spindles on. You gotta make sure it's long so you can adjust how far down you put your tire spindles to keep it away from this frame as much and little as possible, because of course you don't want it to look all goofy. So that's the best way to do that, is leave it long, and then you can take it back off and cut it when you're done, and then it'll look just fine. But on this, these are 4x8s, and the diameter are 13 inches tall. So from the floor to the top, they're 13 inches. And if you don't want this rake, you will want to run a 12-inch tire, because that's about a 1-inch rake on it. So if you bought a 12-inch diameter tire, it'll set level. But of course, you want to be able to run the any tire size, because you'd have to really pay attention to what tires you bought for the front. But this ain't too bad. You really can't tell too terribly. It's pretty ideal on how you could do it and not have to worry about too much stuff. But the biggest trick to doing this is you gotta go and flip this steering rod, and you gotta clearance this frame, because you're getting real close to everything, and you're gonna have to make sure they don't rub. And because I've had the other one I had, it had the Kohler, but it had a Kohler out of a wheel horse, and it had the drain stick down. So when the drain stuck down enough, this rod caught it and it broke it. On the original ones, you can kind of see this already happened on this one. They have a bend right here, and this is a cast rod. So it just snapped this rod right in half. So I had to wind up making a new one, and it never drove great after that, because it was hard to make that rod how that bend was. So you gotta make sure this rod doesn't rub on anything or won't catch, because you will break it up in that corner. But gonna turn out pretty good, and I'll show some pictures of the old tractor I did this to, and hopefully I'll get this done soon enough you guys can see the final product. But here it is, Massey 12 with the narrow front end put on it.